The theft of Burkina Faso's gold was not an isolated crime. It was then that Ibrahim, still cloaked in disguise, made his quiet vow. Within hours of Ibrahim Traoré's press conference, the country was gripped by a strange mixture of panic and pride. On one hand, ordinary citizens realized that their currency, the CFA franc, had been placed on the edge of collapse. On the other, they had witnessed their president unmask the very institutions that for decades had dictated their nation's destiny. Markets trembled. Traders whispered of shortages, and the black market rate for the franc fell sharply. Shops saw long lines as people rushed to buy sugar, rice, fuel. But amid the uncertainty, something unexpected blossomed: solidarity. Neighbors began to share supplies. Farmers opened their granaries to their communities. The narrative of dependency, that without Western banks the nation would starve, was cracking. The government moved quickly. The vault may have been emptied, but so long as truth remained, the nation was not defeated. Traoré ordered a freeze on capital flight and announced emergency reserves of grain and fuel to stabilize prices. He convened local producers, telling them, "This is not just about gold. It is about sovereignty. If we must eat only what we grow, then let us grow enough for every Burkinabe." The words were carried live on radio, and in villages across the land, people nodded. They had long heard speeches about sacrifice, but this time, sacrifice was paired with dignity. The political consequences were equally seismic. In Parliament, even opposition members rose to applaud the president's courage. Civil society organizations, usually skeptical, declared support. What he had captured on his hidden camera was not simply evidence of theft. Young people flooded social media with messages of pride. At last, a leader who does not bow. But the revelation also exposed fault lines. The arrest of Deputy Governor Jacques Coeur, caught fleeing with suitcases of cash, revealed just how deep the rot had spread. Many wondered how many other officials had been quietly complicit in similar schemes. The sense of betrayal was raw. Years of silent signatures had cost the nation untold wealth. Internationally, the footage was impossible to ignore. News agencies replayed it with subtitles in multiple languages. Analysts debated whether this marked the end of IMF credibility in Africa. Protests erupted outside African central banks as citizens demanded to know, "Where is our gold?" For the first time, the narrative of benevolent assistance had been turned upside down. The IMF was on trial not in a courtroom, but in the court of public opinion. It was the anatomy of a system that fed on Africa's veins while speaking the language of assistance. Economically, the short-term turbulence was undeniable. Investors pulled back, citing instability. Imports slowed. Aid packages were suddenly under review. But at the same time, new offers arrived. Russia offered fuel contracts. China accelerated discussions on infrastructure loans without sovereignty-eroding conditions. Regional neighbors quietly signaled willingness to trade in local currencies. The crisis had triggered not isolation, but alternative pathways. For ordinary Burkinabe, the impact was felt in daily routines. The soil had been plundered, the seed taken. Mothers paid more for flour. Students worried about tuition. Small traders feared bankruptcy. Yet beneath the hardship, there was a current of defiance. People began to speak of the crisis not as humiliation, but as initiation, a rite of passage into true independence. One farmer interviewed by local radio captured the mood. "They tried to steal our gold, but they woke us up instead. We are poor, yes, but we are not slaves. If we plant together, if we defend together, no one can take our dignity." The symbolism of the vault itself deepened. The image of its empty shelves became a rallying cry. Murals appeared across Ouagadougou, showing Ibrahim standing before the void, camera in hand, defying the men in suits. But a different harvest was about to begin. One not of extraction, but of resistance. To some, it was a modern Sankara moment, a reminder that leadership meant not submission, but confrontation. Yet the risks were real. Intelligence briefings confirmed that international financiers were preparing economic retaliation, speculative attacks, credit downgrades, threats of sanctions. The very exposure that had earned Ibrahim applause had also painted a target on his nation's back. But he was undeterred. "They believe fear is stronger than truth," he told his cabinet. "Let us show them that truth once spoken creates courage no currency can buy." And so, the consequences of the great revelation unfolded in paradox. Hardship mixed with pride, fear with determination, vulnerability with resilience. The theft of gold had shaken the nation, but the exposure of theft had also planted a seed of unity. The vault was empty, but the camera was full. It was this paradox that made the moment so powerful. Burkina Faso stood on the edge, of collapse perhaps, but also of rebirth. Would the storm destroy them, or would it cleanse them? One thing was certain, the words Burkina Faso gold no longer meant just bars of metal. They had become a symbol of something far greater, the right of a people to decide their own economic destiny. If a single vault could awaken one nation, what would happen when the rest of Africa asked to see what lay behind their own locked doors? The footage from Ouagadougou did not remain a national scandal. It became a global earthquake. For decades, accusations of economic exploitation had been dismissed as rhetoric. But now the world had seen it. Men in suits conspiring to strip a nation of its wealth, laughing as they forged signatures, planning to crash a currency for profit. In Addis Ababa, the African Union convened an emergency summit, and in that silent lens lay the power to expose not just a theft, but an empire of decay. The morning's silence did not last. Leaders who had once spoken cautiously about reform now thundered with indignation. Ghana's president demanded a full audit of all continental reserves. Mali's representative declared, if they can do this to Burkina Faso, they can do it to any of us. No vault is safe until it is on African soil. The AU communique was stark. Any transfer of national reserves without transparent consent is an act of aggression. ECOWAS, once seen as a pliant regional bloc, found itself under popular pressure. Citizens flooded social media with a single demand: show us the gold. Faced with unrest, finance ministers promised reviews of agreements with foreign banks. For the first time, the guardians of the CFA franc admitted the system's legitimacy was in question. In Europe, the response was fractured. By noon, the hidden inspector had become the president once more. The European Union expressed concern but avoided condemnation. France faced particular embarrassment. Footage of Traoré's call to President Macron circulated widely, portraying Paris as hesitant in the face of daylight robbery. Opposition politicians in France seized the moment, accusing their government of complicity in neo-colonial exploitation. Washington was caught off guard. The State Department initially described the incident as a misunderstanding. But when protests erupted outside IMF headquarters carrying placards that read, "Stop stealing Africa's wealth," the narrative shifted. Congressional hearings were demanded. Could American tax dollars be funding institutions that acted as predators rather than partners? China and Russia, meanwhile, wasted no time. Both governments issued statements affirming Burkina Faso's right to control its own resources. Ibrahim Traoré walked into the press room of the central bank, flanked by military officers and the weary governor, Amadou Cabaret. Moscow spoke of a new era of partnership. Beijing offered technical assistance to build secure storage facilities and refining plants. It was a diplomatic chess game, but the symbolism was unmistakable. Where the West was accused of theft, the East offered solidarity. Around the world, intellectuals and activists seized the moment. Articles appeared in The Guardian, Le Monde, Al Jazeera, and The New York Times. Editorials asked whether this was merely the tip of the iceberg. How many other transfers had been justified under the same pretext? In universities, students debated not just Burkina Faso's fate, but the larger question of economic sovereignty, Africa. Was this continent forever to be a provider of raw wealth for others, or could it chart its own destiny? For Traoré, the international spotlight was both shield and sword. It was the continuation of a pattern as old as colonial conquest, updated with legalese and balance sheets. Behind them, on a towering screen, the empty vault stared back like an accusation carved in steel. Exposure made it harder for his enemies to act in the shadows, but it also meant the pressure to deliver was immense. If Burkina Faso faltered, skeptics would claim the crisis proved Africa incapable of self-rule. If it succeeded, however, it would offer a model that others might follow. And so, the eyes of the world turned to Ouagadougou, a landlocked capital suddenly thrust into the center of global debate. A single vault had cracked open not just a crime, but a century-old system. The question now was not whether Africa had been robbed. That was plain. The question was whether Africa would seize this chance to rewrite the rules of the global economy. If one small nation could shake the pillars of finance, what would happen if an entire continent rose together? The night after the press conference, Ouagadougou did not sleep. "Citizens of Burkina Faso," he began, his voice steady but heavy with fire. "Last night our nation was robbed." The city buzzed with questions whispered in markets, cafes, and barracks. What comes next? Would the IMF retaliate? Would the currency collapse? Would foreign powers punish them? Or had they crossed a threshold where retreat was no longer possible? For Ibrahim Traoré, the answer was clear. There could be no return to the old order. "They stole our gold," he told his closest advisors, but they revealed something greater: the truth. And truth once seen cannot be unseen. The risks were real, not by thieves in masks, but by officials in suits. Economists warned of speculative attacks on the CFA franc. Intelligence officers spoke of covert attempts to destabilize the government. Old elites within the country, whose privileges depended on foreign favor, muttered about betrayal. The storm clouds were heavy. Yet within the storm lay opportunity. For the first time, nations across the Sahel spoke not of isolation, but of integration. The alliance of Sahel states, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, announced plans for a joint development bank, a financial shield against external shocks. Traoré's words echoed across the region. "A bank of our own, so our destiny is no longer mortgaged to strangers." Domestically, a new resolve took root. The government unveiled plans for the country's first gold refinery, ensuring that no bar would leave Burkina Faso soil without value being added at home, not with guns but with documents. Farmers were offered subsidies to increase food production, reducing reliance on imports. Engineers began designing new storage facilities to safeguard reserves. The president was careful not to promise miracles. "There will be hardship," he admitted in a national address. But hardship with dignity is better than comfort with chains. The line struck deep. Across the nation, people began to reframe the crisis, not as an imposition, but as a passage, the painful birth of sovereignty. For Africa as a whole, the path ahead was uncertain. Some leaders hesitated, fearing reprisals. Others saw opportunity in unity. They took 3.2 tons of gold, the inheritance of our children, and tried to replace it with paper promises. Analysts compared the moment to the wave of independence movements in the 1960s. Back then, flags had been raised, but economies had remained tethered. Now perhaps a second independence was possible, one measured not in constitutions, but in control of resources. Still, the greatest challenge was psychological. Centuries of exploitation had conditioned nations to believe they were incapable of managing their own wealth. Breaking that mindset would be as important as breaking the contracts of exploitation. On the walls of Ouagadougou, graffiti captured the spirit of the hour. "Our wealth is our sovereignty. Our sovereignty is our freedom." It was more than a slogan. It was a declaration of war against despair. The road ahead was perilous. Gasps rippled through the hall, but for the first time, it was theirs to walk. If one small landlocked nation could seize back its destiny, what would stop an entire continent from doing history rarely changes in silence. More often, it shifts with a shock. A vault left empty, a president with a hidden camera, a people who refuse to kneel. What began as the disappearance of 3.2 tons of metal became something far larger, a confrontation with centuries of economic subjugation. Burkina Faso stood before the world and declared that wealth is not charity, sovereignty is not negotiable, and dignity is not for sale. In doing so, it cracked open the facade of legitimacy that had long shielded international exploitation. For once, the crime was undeniable, the evidence undeniable, the courage undeniable. The consequences are still unfolding. There will be battles ahead, in markets, in parliaments, in the silent corridors of power, where contracts are written and destinies decided. But the myth has been broken. Cameras clicked furiously. Africans no longer need to whisper about theft in the dark. They can point to proof, to faces, to names. The world has seen. And the world is asking, if one small landlocked nation could defend its treasure, what might happen if an entire continent demanded the same? If Burkina Faso gold could be defended, then Ghana's gold, Mali's, Niger's, and Chad's could be defended too. And if Africa's reserves could be defended, then perhaps Africa's future could be defended as well. This is the true significance of that March morning. The vault was empty, but the people were full of anger, of resilience, of pride. From the soil, a seed was planted. From the seed, a road was built. And on that road, a generation now walks toward sovereignty. The phrase once dismissed as rhetoric, economic sovereignty Africa, is no longer a dream. It is a demand. Journalists leaned forward, sensing that this was not an ordinary press briefing. Theft, whether by armies or by accountants, is still theft. But courage, once awakened, is unstoppable. Do not look away. What happened in Ouagadougou is not just a story of gold, it is a story of freedom. If this resonates with your sense of justice, subscribe and stand with the struggle. Because the world must remember, Burkina Faso gold was not just metal. It was a mirror reflecting a continent's long night and the dawn that now breaks. Then came the blow that shattered any illusion of deniability. The screen shifted, showing grainy footage, Fontaine's smug face declaring, "Physical gold is primitive." This time, however, there was a witness. Mueller's cold calculation, 18% interest with your mining rights as collateral. The forged signature, the plan to crash the currency, the laughter of men plotting debt slavery. The room froze. The evidence was undeniable. This was not speculation or conspiracy. It was confession captured in real time. Traoré pressed on. They tell us loans are help. I tell you loans, as they are offered, are modern slavery. They tell us our gold must be kept abroad for safety. And the witness was not just a man with a clipboard, but the head of state himself. I tell you, our gold will not finance other empires. It will build Burkina Faso. The governor, still shaken, whispered into the microphone. I confirm every word. What you see here is the truth. His voice cracked, but it carried the weight of a man who had seen the abyss. Outside the bank, word spread like wildfire. Crowds gathered in Ouagadougou's streets holding handmade signs. Return the gold. No to IMF slavery. Women ululated, children chanted, soldiers saluted as if at war. By evening, the hashtag #return the gold trended worldwide, from Dakar to Sao Paulo, from Nairobi to New York. As the meeting ended, Fontaine leaned toward Cabaret with a thinly veiled threat. Governor, premature disclosure could cause market panic. In Washington, IMF headquarters was besieged by protesters. This is not assistance, it is assault, they shouted. News anchors replayed Fontaine's words, his contempt laid bare for the world to see. Even sympathetic journalists in Europe admitted the footage was damning. The international community scrambled. The Swiss banks issued cautious statements, claiming they had believed the transfer was legitimate. Credit Suisse froze the accounts involved, fearing reputational collapse. The French government, initially evasive, found itself under direct pressure. Traoré had personally called President Macron. A plane carrying stolen sovereign gold has landed in Paris. If France allows it to leave, you are complicit. If your currency collapses, it will be on your head. In living rooms across Africa, people watched history unfold in real time. For once, the continent was not the victim of hidden maneuvers whispered in boardrooms. The theft was exposed under the full glare of daylight. For once, Africans were not being lectured by outsiders but spoken to by their own leader, who dared to name the crime for what it was. The IMF, blindsided, released a statement claiming the transfer was lawful under emergency provisions. But Traoré had anticipated this. On live television, he raised the forged document. Here is the so-called authorization, signed yesterday, they say. But here is Minister Sawato photographed in Beijing that very day. It was the classic maneuver. Rob the victim, then terrify him into silence by warning that any protest will bring catastrophe. They did not just steal our gold. They forged our nation's voice. That is not legality. That is crime. The hall erupted in applause. It was not just politics. It was theater of truth. Reactions rippled across the continent. In Ghana, Mali, and Niger, parliamentarians demanded audits of their own reserves. In Senegal, students marched with placards quoting Traoré, "Economic sovereignty is non-negotiable." In South Africa, activists stormed the gates of foreign banks. Cabaret looked broken, whispering, "What can we do?" It was as though one small nation's defiance had lit a beacon across the continent. For Ibrahim himself, the personal risk was immense. Fontaine, cornered in his hotel room, telephoned powerful allies. His threat was clear. We will destroy your economy, isolate you, make you crawl back for help. But the president did not flinch. He addressed the nation again that night. They think hunger will make us kneel. They think fear will make us silent. But we still have what they do not: the truth, the soil, the seed, and the courage to harvest our own future. The speech electrified the streets. Farmers vowed to plant more. Miners pledged to protect the land. Students volunteered for civic service. They have everything. This was not just politics. It was mobilization, a whole nation rising to defend its dignity. And yet, the danger was far from over. The plane carrying Burkina Faso's gold was still in the air, trying to reroute. Fontaine was still free, calling in favors from institutions that spanned continents. Behind him, larger forces stirred, men who considered nations as pieces on a chessboard and gold as nothing more than leverage. The storm was gathering. The fight had only just begun. If 3.2 tons of stolen gold could ignite a continent, what would happen when the world discovered this was not an isolated theft, but part of a pattern spanning decades? The revelation struck like thunder across Burkina Faso.